Hello, beautiful people. Hola, annyeonghaseyo, bonjour, ni hao, namaste. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm very excited to film this video because this is the video that I wanted to film for a very long time but I could not, and finally I'm here. And in this video I'm going to talk about all the books that I have read that Kim Namjoon had recommended. These are I can actually call it a recommendation because he particularly have not recommended this book, but he have been seen reading those books and he have talked about those books in his interview. Before I get started with the books, let me tell you about Kim Namjoon. I know he don't need any introduction, but this is just for the people who don't know who Kim Namjoon is. So Kim Namjoon is the leader, rapper, songwriter and a spokesperson of this biggest boy band group on the planet, BTS. And Kim Namjoon loves to read and he is the only reader in the group, and he just loves different genres, but his most favorite genre can be categorized as philosophical books, and that's why it was a very tough read for me because there is a lot of philosophical books and I find it hard to read philosophical books. Though Kim Namjoon is also interested in poetry and literature, but he mainly read a lot of philosophical books, and because that helps him to come up with new ideas for his new songs, and he just find inspiration in those books. That's why he read a lot of books. Kim Namjoon, aka Ramp Monster, has such a good taste in books, and I just loved the experience going through these books because these books had some humor and some tragic stories. So let's get started with the video and talk about the books that I have read that is recommended by Kim Namjoon, aka Rap Monster. So the very first book that I read was Human Act by Hong Kong, and this is the book that I want to tell you before I talk about this book is that this book is very tragic and it has a very tragic incident in this book. So this book is basically about this uprising that happened in South Korea, in which when the president was assassinated and his close friend took the charge through military coup, there was an uprising against it in South Korea, and this is basically about this boy Dong-ho who was killed in this uprising, and the tragic story unfolds in a different sequence of interconnected stories. So this story has a lot of perspective. There is a lot of people who were engaged in this story and they met their fateful ends, but there is Dong-ho's best friend who met his fateful end, and to an educator struggling against censorship, a prisoner and factory worker. So there is a lot of trauma and suffering, and there is traumatic memories that happen in this book, and the suppression, massacre, brutality were insane. And I'm sure if you will read this story, you feel the pain and the tragic of this book through your heart when you will read this book. So this was just an amazing story to read about the past of the South Korea and all the things that happened which we are aware of. So this is a really good book to get started with. And the next book that I read was The Stranger by Albert Camus, and this is the story of this man Mersault, who is a detached and seemingly apathetic person living in this French colonized Algeria. So the story begins with Mersault's mother died and he went to her funeral, but his lack of empathy and his emotions set him apart from societal norms. And later in the story, Mersault get engaged in the series of events that lead to senseless act of violence, and this is the novel that is kind of very thought-provoking as well as it is a philosophical work that challenges conventional notions of morality and invites readers to question the nature of human existence. And at the beginning it was a very tough read for me because I could not understand a thing about this, and there was a lot of philosophical thoughts in this book, and but this was overall a good read, and it was a good experience of reading and learning from this book. And the next book that I read was The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, and this begins with the story of Gregor Samson, who is a traveling salesman, and one day when he wake up he find himself turned into a giant like creature like insect, and he find it really hard to live as a creature that can't move, and he find it really tough to live as a creature with a very little space, and he just end up in a very lonely place, because finding it that he just spent all his life for his families and to take care of them, but when he just turned into an insect like creature, and his family find him very disgusted, and they kind of feel him as a burden and not as a family member. And I think that this book is a powerful exploration of alienation, isolation, and the human condition. And this is a perfect book to read to understand the human nature and the alienation, and to understand how they behave toward other human beings when they are in need. So this is a perfect example for that book, and this is fantastic read. The next book that I read was Kafka on the Shore by Murakami. The story is told through the perspective of two main characters, a 15-year-old Kafka Tamura and an elderly man Nakataka. And Tamura ran away from his family in Tokyo because he was afraid of a prophecy about him that he's going to do some terrible things, and so he fled from his home, and he just take refuge in a private library, and he met people who kind of help him to become his member and guide him to his journey of self-discovery. And then there is Nakataka, who is intellectual disabled, and has the ability to talk to cats, and he become involved in a series of supernatural events, and that eventually lead him to meet cross the path with Kafka Tamura. And together they both embark on a journey that takes them across Japan, encountering bizarre characters and events along the way. The book explores the theme of identity, destiny, memory, and the boundaries of reality and fantasy. This is such a unique book that I have read, and now I understand why people are kind of obsessed with Murakami books, because he has such a unique way of telling stories, and his stories has such a grip toward the reader, because there is reality but there is also fantasy, and there is supernatural things in this book that keep captivating the readers to read more and more. I just loved this book because this book was something very different from the normal books that I read, and this has such a unique story, and I just really loved this book, and I'm just happy to get started with the book, and I'm sure that I'm going to read a lot of Murakami books from now on. The next book that I read was Kim Namjoon, born 1982 by Kim Namjoon, and this is the book that revolves around this ordinary woman in her 30s living in South Korea, and this book explores the term of sexism and gender inequality that Kim Jong faces throughout her life as she navigates through various stages of her existence from childhood to adulthood. She encounters gender bias, discrimination, societal expectations, and the limitation imposed upon her as a woman. She feels the pressure of the motherhood and the unequal distribution of household responsibilities. And while reading this book, I find a lot of similarities between a Korean woman and an Indian woman, because the women struggle with same things, and there is a lot of taboos and misinterpretations of women's thoughts. So there is a lot of common things among the women, but I think that this kind of discrimination and gender inequality is just the women all around the world can face this gender inequality and the gender discrimination. So this is a kind of an universal problem for the women all across the world, and this book was a very personal touch to it, as every woman will relate with this story. And the next book that I read was Norwegian Wood by Murakami again, and this is the story of this young student Toru Watanabe, who find himself caught in a complicated love triangle between these two women. Naoko, a fragile, emotionally troubled young woman who was the girlfriend of his best friend who committed suicide, and then Midori, outgoing and vibrant classmate. As Toru navigates his relationship with Naoko and Midori, he also grapples with his own feelings of isolation and the pressure of adulthood. The novel deeply talks about the characters' emotional struggle and their search of meaning and connections in the world filled with uncertainty. This book is based on the theme of love, loss, and the pursuit of personal identity. And after reading this book, I can't say that I understand Murakami's book completely, but he has some unique features and unique storytelling that no one can stop reading his books, and that's why now I can say that yes, he is also my favorite author because he had some amazing stories to tell, and I just loved Murakami's book now. And the next book that I read was Almond, a novel by Won Pyong Song, and this book is about this boy Yeonjae who was born with a brain condition called alexithymia, and that makes it hard for him to show emotions like fear and anger. His mother and grandmother make sticky notes for him to teach him how to mingle with normal people and how to and when to say thank you and when to just smile. But on his 16th birthday, a shocking act of violence shattered his world, leaving him alone and on his own. Then he met this boy gone, a troubled teenager, and after a lot of trouble with each other, they find that they have something in common, and they can be friends and they can live for each others. And this book is such a unique book, and I just absolutely love this book. And this book gives the message of how love, friendship and persistence can change life forever. And this is the biggest message to take away from this book, and this is the fantastic book that I have read, and I absolutely loved these books. And next book is a book that I wanted to read for a very long time, and I don't know why I did not pick it earlier, but I wanted to read it and it was always in my reading TBR, and thanks to RM finally I read this book. And this book is Me Before You by Jojo Moyes, and this story revolves around this girl Louisa Clark who took the job of caregiver for Will Tranner, a wealthy and successful man who was get paralyzed from the neck down after a tragic accident. And as they spend more time together, they form an unlikely bond and develops a deep connections. Louisa is determined to show Will how so Will that life is still worth living, and she tries to broaden his horizons by introducing him to new experience. This is novel that I just feel connected to myself, and this was the book that just resonates with how I feel, and this was a perfect book and I just loved this one. And this novel explores the theme of love, self-discovery and the right to make choices about one's own life. The next book that I read was Please Look After Mom by Kyung Suk Shin, and this story begins with an elderly woman Park Shun-yo who goes missing in a crowded subway station in Seoul, South Korea, and the novel follows the perspective of her husband, son, daughter, and ultimately Park Shun-yo. As the family members search for their missing mother and wife, they begin to reflect on their own relationship with her and the sacrifices she made for them throughout her life. Through alternative narratives, the novels delve into their memories, regrets, and the realization of the depth of their love for her. And this is a perfect book to read. I will suggest everyone to read this book so that you can understand how your mother, your daughter, your sister, or anyone in your family, how they just sacrifice things for you and for people around them, and especially mother, and how they do everything in their power to bring a good life to their children or to their husbands. This is the perfect book, and I will think that everyone can interact with this book and they can feel words and the emotions in this book. So this was a perfect book. And last but not the least is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and this is the book that I am currently rereading, but this is the book that I have read before. This is book for everyone to read, and this follows this girl Nora Seed who is just full of regrets, and she is just so unhappy with her life, decided to end her life. But then she woke up in this library where there are thousands and thousands of books, and every book is just part of her life. In Midnight Library, each book represents a different life that Nora could have lived, and she had made different choices. Nora is given the opportunity to try out these alternate lives and see if any of them can bring the fulfillment and the happiness she seeks. And finally, she learns valuable lessons about the importance of embracing the present moment and finding purpose and appreciating the small joys that offer in life. This book offers a hopeful and inspiring message about the potential for growth and in finding contentment with ourselves. And this is the perfect book to read if you are feeling low or down, and this will just give you a new perspective to live. So it brings us to the end of this video, and I can say that I had a lot of fun reading these books, and I can say probably that yes, Kim Namjoon has such a fantastic taste in books, and I just absolutely can read all the books that he will recommend in the future. And this was such a fun experience to read all those books, because each book is so unique in its own space, and I just loved it. So that's it. Read those books if you like, and let me know what you think about these books. So see you next time, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.